The text from Mom lit up my phone screen. Family meeting. Our house. 7 p.m. Urgent. My stomach did a familiar, unpleasant flip. Urgent in my family usually meant one of two things. Either they needed me to play tech support for the umpteenth time, or more likely, my brother Carson had messed up again, and they needed a solution, preferably one that involved me. My name is Esme, by the way, and I'd spent most of my adult life trying to build something for myself, away from the constant, low-humming chaos of my family. I walked into their living room at 7 on the dot. The air was thick enough to spread on toast. Mom, Adeline, sat ramrod straight on the sofa, her lips a thin, disapproving line. Dad, George, was slumped in his armchair, looking like he'd aged a decade since I last saw him. And there, perched on the edge of the ottoman like a concerned cherub, was Carson. He even managed to squeeze out a worried frown, though his eyes held that familiar flicker of something I couldn't quite name, but always distrusted. Esme, thank you for coming, Mom began, her voice tight. We have some difficult news. I waited. This was their stage. I was just the audience, or occasionally the prop. We're ruined, Esme, Dad mumbled, staring at his hands. Financially, completely. I blinked. Ruined? They lived comfortably. Dad had a decent pension. Mom had her part-time job at the library she lorded over. What happened? Mom shot a look at Carson, a strange, almost protective glance, before turning back to me. It's complicated, dear. Bad investments, unexpected expenses. It's all just piled up. And, she continued, her voice gaining a sharper edge, we've been looking at all our assets, everything we have, and it's just not enough to cover this hole. I saw Carson nod slowly, his expression a perfect mask of sympathy. He was wearing a new smartwatch, I noticed, very sleek, very expensive looking for someone whose parents were supposedly ruined. Over the past 6 months, while their vague complaints about money had started to surface, Carson had mysteriously acquired a new phone, designer trainers, and was always talking about fancy restaurants he'd been to. So, Mom said, taking a deep breath, we need your help. Here it comes, I thought, the ask. Your little house, Esme, she said, her gaze flicking towards me with an almost accusatory glint. You bought it when prices were lower. It's gained some equity. My heart began to thump a slow, heavy beat. My house. The small 2-bedroom place I'd poured every spare cent and countless hours of sweat into. My sanctuary, my independence. We need you to sell it, she stated flatly, to cover the debts. The room fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had underscored every significant and usually unpleasant family announcement of my life. Sell my house? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. It's the only way, Esme, Carson chimed in, his voice oozing fake concern. We're family. We have to pull together. He even reached out and patted my arm. I resisted the urge to flinch. Mom seized on his cue. Exactly, Carson. Thank you for being so understanding. Esme, darling, we know it's a lot to ask, but what else can we do? We'll be out on the street. The melodrama was Oscar-worthy, but then she delivered the line that made my blood boil. And honestly, Esme, she said, a sigh escaping her lips, that little online shop of yours, it was always a bit of a gamble, wasn't it? Perhaps if you'd had a more stable career, you could help us in other ways. But this is where we are. My shop, my thriving online craft business that I'd built from scratch, the one that paid my mortgage, my bills, and allowed me to save a little, the one they'd always dismissed as a cute hobby. Now it was somehow to blame for their financial ruin. The audacity was breathtaking. I looked at their faces, Mom's, pinched with a mixture of desperation and self-righteousness, Dad's, crumpled and defeated, avoiding my gaze, and Carson's, that carefully constructed mask of solemn support, but with that tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing around his lips. He thought he had me. They all did. The dutiful daughter, the eternal scapegoat, ready to sacrifice her hard-won stability for their, what? Mismanagement? Or something else? That new smartwatch gleamed under the lamplight. A cold, clear thought cut through the anger and the hurt. This wasn't just about money. This was about a pattern, a lifetime of it. I took a slow breath, meeting Mom's gaze, then Dad's, then letting my eyes rest on Carson for a fraction too long. "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Okay, I'll sell the house." I even managed a small, sad smile. For the family. Relief washed over Mom's face so intensely it was almost comical. Dad let out a shaky sigh. Carson's smirk finally broke free, morphing into a satisfied little smile before he quickly schooled his features back into somber concern. They bought it, every last word. But as I watched them, a different kind of resolve solidified within me, hard and sharp as glass. If they thought I was just going to roll over and let them bulldoze my life to cover up their mess, or more accurately, what I was beginning to suspect was his mess, they were in for a very big surprise. This family meeting wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, Mom called, her voice at least 2 shades lighter. "Esme, darling, I've already spoken to Brenda from down the street. You know her cousin is a real estate agent? She says the market is very good right now. We could get this sorted quickly." "That's great, Mom," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while staring at my laptop screen, a half-written email to a local appraiser open. "Just send me the agent's details." "Oh, wonderful! You see, George, I told you Esme would come through for us," I heard her say to Dad in the background, followed by his indistinct murmur. Carson, naturally, had to add his 2 cents. He sauntered over to my place a couple of days later, ostensibly to see if I needed help packing. He wandered through my living room, picking up my carefully curated knickknacks, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "You know, sis," he said, examining a small ceramic bird I'd made, "it's probably for the best. This place is a bit small, isn't it? Once you've helped Mom and Dad out, you can find a nice little apartment. Less upkeep." "Right," I said, gritting my teeth. "Less upkeep." My little house, my pride and joy, dismissed as a temporary inconvenience. "And you're doing the right thing," he added, patting my shoulder with that infuriatingly condescending air of his. "Family first, always." "Always," I echoed, already picturing the digital breadcrumbs I was determined to follow. As soon as he left, I got to work. My agreement to sell was a smokescreen, a way to buy myself time. I remembered Carson, a few months back, puffing his chest out after a phone call, muttering something about a sweet deal he'd landed that was gonna change things. At the time, I dismissed it as typical Carson bluster. Now, it felt significant. My first stop was their shared online banking. Years ago, I'd helped Mom and Dad set it up, and my login details, embarrassingly, still worked. They weren't exactly tech-savvy, and I doubted they'd ever bothered to change the password I'd set for them, Fluffy193, after their dearly departed cat. Sure enough, I was in. I started scrolling back through months of statements, my heart thumping. I was looking for anything around the time Carson started his spending spree, and my parents began their vague moaning about tightening belts. It didn't take long. There were several large transfers, all marked with vague descriptions like loan repayment or investment withdrawal. But they weren't withdrawals from an investment. They were disbursements into their main checking account. And then, almost immediately, similar large sums would go out, labeled simply transfer, or with a generic biller name I didn't recognize. The amounts were significant, far more than their usual expenses. And the timing? It lined up almost perfectly with Carson's new phone, his designer wardrobe updates, and those fancy dinners he'd been bragging about. "What are you up to, Carson?" I murmured to the screen. I spent hours cross-referencing dates, amounts, trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. My online shop orders chimed in the background, a steady rhythm of legitimacy against the murky transactions I was uncovering. Mom called again a few days later. "The agent is coming over to your place tomorrow at 10 to do an initial valuation, Esme. Make sure it's tidy, dear." "Will do, Mom," I said, my mind racing. I needed something more concrete. That evening, I was at their house, ostensibly to pick up some old photo albums Mom wanted me to store safely, since they'd soon be downsizing. The real reason was the family computer in the study. Carson was notoriously lazy about logging out of his accounts. While Mom was fussing in the kitchen and Dad was watching TV, I slipped into the study. My fingers flew over the keyboard. Bingo. He'd left his email logged in. My breath hitched. I scanned his inbox, my eyes darting over subject lines. Most of it was junk, gaming notifications, social media updates, and then I saw it. An email confirmation from Prestige Auto Detailing. The date was 3 months ago, right when the large sum started moving out of my parents' account. The subject line read, "Your full detail and ceramic coating appointment for Mercedes C-Class." A Mercedes? Carson? He drove a beat-up 10-year-old hatchback that was perpetually low on gas. I clicked open the email. It confirmed an appointment, the make and model of the car, and listed the services performed, the works, costing a small fortune. My eyes scanned down to the location of the detailing shop. It was in the city's most affluent district, right next to a string of high-end car dealerships. Dealerships Carson couldn't afford to even window shop at, let alone buy from. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about him sponging off Mom and Dad for new clothes. This was something much, much bigger. And he was trying to make me pay for it with my home. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall. My hand tightened into a fist. He wasn't just going to get away with this. Not anymore. The Prestige Auto Detailing email was a blazing arrow pointing directly at Carson's deception. The next morning, I told the real estate agent Mom had sent that I needed a few more days to declutter before she officially listed the house. She was surprisingly understanding, probably used to sellers dragging their feet. That bought me a little more breathing room. I drove out to the address from the email. The detailing shop was exactly where it said it would be, nestled between a gleaming Porsche dealership and a showroom filled with sleek, expensive Audis. I parked across the street, just watching for a while. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I eventually went into the Audi dealership, pretending to browse. "Just looking for some inspiration," I told a young, eager salesman who approached me. "My brother's been talking about upgrading his car, mentioned he was around this area recently, drives an older hatchback, but he's dreaming big." The salesman, probably smelling a potential commission, however distant, became chatty. "Oh, we get a lot of dreamers, and sometimes they become buyers. What's his name? Maybe he popped in." "Carson," I said. "Carson W. Just Carson." I mentally kicked myself for almost saying our surname. He tapped on his tablet. Don't see a Carson in our recent inquiries, but people browse all the time." He then gestured vaguely. "The Mercedes dealership next door does a lot of business, too. Popular choice." Mercedes. The email had specified a Mercedes C-Class. I thanked him and left, feeling a little deflated, but also more certain. He wouldn't have used his real name if he was just browsing, but the car detail was specific. Back home, I took a deep breath and dipped into my shop's emergency savings. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hire one of those online private investigator services that specialized in vehicle registration searches. I typed in Carson's full name and our state, paid the modest fee, and crossed my fingers. The site said it could take 24 to 48 hours. The waiting was agony. That night was the pre-scheduled family dinner at my parents' house, a weekly ritual I usually tried to find excuses to miss. Tonight, I knew I had to go, to keep up appearances. "So, Esme?" Mom began as she served overcooked roast chicken. Brenda's cousin said your house should sell quickly. She's very optimistic. That's good, I said, pushing a dry piece of chicken around my plate. Carson naturally couldn't resist a jab. He'd been unusually quiet, mostly smirking into his plate. Yeah, it's great you're finally contributing something significant, sis. Shame that little online hobby of yours couldn't even cover a decent dinner like this, eh? He gestured expansively at the mediocre meal. My fork clattered against the plate. I bit back the retort that my little hobby paid my mortgage, something he, living rent-free with our parents, clearly couldn't comprehend. Now, Carson, be nice, Mom chided gently, but there was no real heat in it. Your sister is doing her best, and you've been such a rock for us through all this, dear, she added, beaming at him. So supportive. I nearly choked on my water. Supportive? He was the bloody iceberg that was sinking their financial Titanic. Dad just grunted, engrossed in dissecting his chicken wing. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I excused myself early, pleading a headache. The drive home was filled with a simmering rage. How could they be so blind? Or were they willfully ignorant? The next afternoon, an email pinged into my inbox. Subject, Vehicle Registration Search Results. My heart leaped. I clicked it open. There it was. Carson Williams, registered owner of a silver Mercedes-Benz C300, purchased 3 months ago. The report even included a grainy, time-stamped photo taken from a public parking garage security camera feed the PI service had somehow accessed. It was undeniably Carson, looking pleased as punch, standing next to a gleaming silver sedan. A car that cost more than my parents' combined annual income. A car that screamed fraud. I stared at the photo, at his smug face. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were slamming together with the force of a battering ram. He hadn't just siphoned off a bit of cash for gadgets. He'd bought a luxury car, and he was going to let me lose my home to cover his tracks. The anger was a cold, hard knot in my stomach now. This wasn't just about getting my house back. This was about justice. This was about making him and them face the truth. The real estate agent could wait. I had more important appointments to make. The proof of Carson's Mercedes lit a fire under me, but it also meant I had to tread even more carefully. My parents, however, were ramping up the pressure cooker. Esme, the agent called again. Mom's voice crackled over the phone the next morning. She said you haven't signed the listing agreement yet. Is everything all right, dear? We really need to get this moving. Just finalizing a few things, Mom, I said, trying to sound busy and responsible. You know, paperwork. Well, don't finalize for too long, she replied, her tone sharpening. Time is of the essence. Later that day, she helpfully dropped by my house, unannounced. She had a stack of brochures in her hand. I was just passing by the community center, she chirped, handing them to me, and they had these listings for some lovely little apartments, much more manageable for a single girl like you once all this unpleasantness is over. I flipped through them. They were all tiny, depressing one-bedroom flats in rundown buildings on the other side of town. My stomach churned. Thanks, Mom. I'll look at them. Good girl. She patted my cheek, a gesture that felt more like a brand than affection. The walls felt like they were closing in. I needed more than just a picture of Carson with a fancy car. I needed to link it directly to the money disappearing from my parents' accounts. The online bank statements I'd found showed large loan disbursements into their account, which were then quickly transferred out. I needed to know where those loans came from. Carson, meanwhile, was starting to act twitchy. He'd always been arrogant, but now there was an undercurrent of something else. Suspicion, maybe? He'd casually drop by my house more often, asking pointed questions. Spending a lot of time on that computer, sis, he commented one afternoon, peering over my shoulder. I was actually researching local credit unions and loan companies, trying to see if any of their logos or names matched the vague biller descriptions on the bank statements. I quickly minimized the window. Just shop stuff, I said. End-of-month accounts. Right, your little empire. He smirked. You're not having second thoughts about helping Mom and Dad, are you? Because you know they're really counting on you. His eyes narrowed slightly. Of course not, Carson, I said, forcing a smile. Just stressed with everything. Selling a house isn't exactly a walk in the park. He seemed to accept that, but his gaze lingered on my screen for a moment too long before he sauntered off to raid my fridge. He was definitely rattled about something. Was it just the general family stress, or did he suspect I was on to him? The pressure was immense. I was juggling my actual business, the charade of selling my house, and this secret, all-consuming investigation. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. One evening, fueled by coffee and sheer determination, I was in my home office, printing out the crucial bank statements I'd downloaded from my parents' account, the ones showing the loan deposits and the subsequent large withdrawals. I needed hard copies, something tangible. The printer whirred, spitting out page after page. Suddenly the door creaked open. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Carson. Hey, Esme, Mom sent me over to get that casserole dish she lent you, he said, his eyes flicking around the room before landing on the printer. I moved fast, almost instinctively. I grabbed a thick stack of my shop's recent invoices and order forms from my desk and slapped them down on top of the freshly printed bank statements, just as the last page was emerging. Oh, hey, I said, trying to sound casual, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Just doing my taxes. You know how it is. He ambled closer, peering at the top sheet, which was thankfully a legitimate invoice for a large order of handmade soaps. Taxes, huh? Fun stuff. His gaze drifted to the edge of the papers beneath the invoices. A sliver of a bank logo, a line of figures, was just barely visible. My breath caught. He frowned, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Looks like a lot of paperwork for your little hobby. It's growing, I said, my voice a little too bright. Keeps me busy. I quickly scooped up the entire pile, bank statements and invoices jumbled together, and shoved them into a drawer. Casserole dishes in the kitchen, top cupboard. He hesitated for a second, his eyes still on the drawer, then shrugged. Right, thanks. He turned and left. I leaned against the desk, my legs feeling like jelly. That was too close. Way too close. Had he seen enough to be truly alarmed, or had my quick thinking bought me more time? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I needed to find the final piece of the puzzle, and I needed to do it fast before he, or my parents, forced my hand. The next move had to be mine. Carson didn't mention the printer incident again, but there was a new wariness in his eyes whenever he looked at me. He started asking more questions about the house sale, about the specific bank we'd be using for the equity transfer. I knew I was running out of time. I became a ghost, moving through my days with a singular focus. The photos of Carson with the Mercedes were good, but I needed something more direct. I started paying closer attention to his infrequent social media posts. He wasn't stupid enough to post pictures of the car, but he did check in at a trendy new cafe near the financial district fairly regularly. One afternoon, armed with my phone, I coincidentally happened to be at that same cafe. I ordered a coffee, found a discreet table, and waited. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, Carson strolled in, looking pleased with himself. He met someone, a flashy guy I didn't recognize, and they sat near the window. As they were leaving, I managed to get a couple of quick, clear photos of Carson walking towards the street, his Mercedes parked brazenly at a meter just a few feet away. The angle even caught part of the license plate. Click. Gotcha. The real breakthrough, though, came from a desperate, late-night gamble. Mom had, in one of her more anxious ramblings about their debt, mentioned the names of a couple of loan companies they'd supposedly dealt with in the past for a small home improvement loan years ago. Friendly Finance and Secure Lend, she'd called them. On a hunch, I visited their websites. Most legitimate financial institutions have online portals for customers. I tried friendly finance first. I knew Dad's email, his date of birth, the usual stuff. The security questions were the hurdle. What was the name of your first pet? I remembered them talking about a scruffy terrier named Patch from before I was born. I typed it in. What is your mother's maiden name? Easy. What was the model of your first car? That one stumped me for a bit. Then I recalled Dad grumbling about an old Ford Cortina he'd loved. My breath hitched as the screen changed. Logan successful. I was in. My hands were shaking. I navigated to the loan documents section, and there they were, not old home improvement loans. These were recent, very recent, 3 of them, all taken out in the last 4 months, each for a substantial 5-figure sum. The total was astronomical, easily enough to buy a luxury car and then some, and all in my parents' names, George and Adeline. My blood ran cold as I opened the scanned PDF of the first loan agreement. I scrolled down to the signature line. George's name was there, but it wasn't quite right. Dad's signature was usually a confident, slightly flamboyant scrawl. This was shaky, hesitant, the loops a little too round, the slant slightly off. It was a decent attempt, passable if you weren't looking closely, but I knew my father's signature. I'd seen it on countless school permission slips, birthday checks, official documents. This wasn't it. My mind raced. Carson. It had to be. He lived with them. He'd have access to their mail, their personal information. I pulled out an old birthday card from my desk, one Carson had given me years ago. His handwriting was lazy, a bit sloppy, but certain characteristics jumped out. The way he formed his G, the slightly exaggerated curve of his S. I held the card next to the screen, comparing his writing to the forged signature on the loan document. It was a match. Not a perfect CSI-level match, but close enough for my gut to scream, "Guilty!" I felt sick. He hadn't just taken their money. He'd actively forged their signatures, saddling them with crippling debt they clearly knew nothing about the true extent of, all for a stupid car and a lifestyle he couldn't afford. And they, in their blind favoritism, were ready to throw me to the wolves to fix a problem he created. I immediately called Sarah, my best friend. I'd kept her vaguely in the loop, but now I spilled everything. The car, the bank statements, the forged signatures. "Oh my God, Esme," she breathed, horrified. That's insane. Your own brother?" "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "I feel like I'm going to be sick." "What are you going to do?" she asked. I took a deep breath, the image of the forged signature burning in my mind. "I'm going to expose him." Sarah was silent for a moment. "Are you sure? This will blow up your whole family." "They were ready to blow up my life," I said, a cold, hard resolve settling in. It's time they faced the consequences of his actions and their own blindness. I spent the rest of the night compiling my evidence, printouts of the loan documents with the forged signatures highlighted, the photos of Carson with the Mercedes, copies of the bank statements showing the money flowing in and out, even a printout of that damning car detailing email. I placed everything into a neat, ominous folder. The bank meeting, the one where I was supposed to sign away my house to help the family, was scheduled for the next morning. Mom had called earlier, her voice practically giddy with relief. "Tomorrow, Esme, we can finally put this all behind us." I looked at the folder. Tomorrow, indeed. But it wouldn't be me putting anything behind me. It would be them, finally facing what they'd allowed to happen, what they'd tried to make me pay for. The anger was still there, but now it was accompanied by a strange, steely calm. I knew exactly what I had to do. Sleep was a forgotten concept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the folder of evidence a heavy weight on my nightstand. Each tick of my alarm clock sounded like a countdown. I replayed the upcoming confrontation in my mind, over and over, trying out different opening lines, imagining their faces. Would Mom scream? Would Dad finally show some backbone? Would Carson even attempt to lie his way out of it when faced with cold, hard proof? My phone buzzed around 11. It was Mom. "Esme, darling, are you all set for tomorrow?" Her voice was unnervingly cheerful, laced with an almost manic relief. "George and I were just saying, it'll be such a weight off our minds. We can finally breathe again. Thanks to you, sweetheart." "All set, Mom," I managed, my own voice a hollow echo of her forced brightness. "See you at the bank." "Wonderful. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." Click. I squeezed my eyes shut. Thanks to me. The irony was a bitter pill. They were thanking me for unknowingly funding their son's joyride while preparing to sacrifice my future. The thought fueled the cold fire in my belly. A few minutes later, another buzz, a text message, from Carson. "Looking forward to tomorrow. You're doing a good thing, sis. Really appreciate it." Followed by a smug-looking smiley face emoji. I threw my phone onto the duvet, a surge of pure, unadulterated rage washing over me. Appreciate it? He appreciated that I was about to lose my home, my security, the one thing I'd built for myself, all so he could continue his charade? The audacity was breathtaking, but the rage quickly cooled, replaced by that strange, icy calm that had become my companion. Let him look forward to it. Let them all. I got out of bed and walked over to my desk, picking up the folder. I opened it, methodically checking each document one last time. The loan applications with those shaky, forged signatures. The printouts of Dad's real signature from old letters, a stark contrast. The glossy photos of Carson beaming beside his silver Mercedes. The bank statements, a clear trail of money flowing in from phantom loans and out to fund his lifestyle. The email from Prestige Auto Detailing. It was all there. A neat, undeniable narrative of deceit and betrayal. I thought back over the years. The countless times Carson's minor scrapes had been smoothed over by Mom and Dad. The way my achievements were met with polite but distant acknowledgement, while Carson's smallest, most mundane accomplishments were lauded as genius. The constant, subtle erosion of my worth in their eyes, always second best, always the responsible one expected to pick up the pieces. This wasn't just about a house or money anymore. This was about every dismissive comment, every overlooked success, every time I'd been made to feel like an afterthought in my own family. This was about reclaiming something far more valuable than property, my dignity, my truth. I finally drifted into a restless sleep for a few hours, the images of their faces, shocked, horrified, betrayed, dancing behind my eyelids. The morning dawned gray and overcast, matching my mood. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple, professional outfit. I wanted to look calm, composed, in control. I made coffee but couldn't drink it. My stomach was a knot of anxiety and anticipation. As I picked up the folder, my hand was surprisingly steady. This was it. No turning back. The thought, instead of terrifying me, brought a strange sense of peace. I was no longer a pawn in their game. Today, I was setting the board. I drove to the bank, the folder resting on the passenger seat beside me like a silent, powerful ally. I pulled into the parking lot, and there they were, already walking towards the entrance, Mom, Dad, and Carson. Mom was chattering animatedly to the bank manager, a portly man with a kind face who I vaguely recognized from a previous visit when I'd opened my business account. His name tag read, Marco Powell. Dad trailed slightly behind, looking uncomfortable but relieved. Carson walked with a swagger, his hands in his pockets, a self-satisfied smirk firmly in place. He saw me get out of my car and actually had the nerve to give me a condescending wink, like we were conspirators in my own financial ruin. I clutched the folder tighter. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat against the impending storm. I took a deep breath and walked towards them, towards the sterile quiet of the bank, towards the moment that would change everything. The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of resentment, with the imminent explosion of a carefully constructed lie. This wasn't just a meeting, It was a reckoning. Marco Powell, the bank manager, ushered us into a small, glass-walled conference room. "Please have a seat. Coffee? Water?" Mom simpered. Water would be lovely, thank you, Marco." Carson leaned back in his chair, looking for all the world like he owned the place. Dad just looked down at the polished table. I sat opposite them, placing my folder squarely in front of me. Marco began, his tone professional and sympathetic. "So, Adeline, George, as we discussed, your current financial situation is quite precarious. Several outstanding personal loans, maxed credit facilities. It's a significant debt load." He glanced at me. "And Esme, you've generously agreed to leverage the equity in your property to help consolidate these debts and alleviate the immediate pressure. We have the preliminary paperwork here." He started to slide a sheaf of papers across the table towards me. This was it. My cue. "Actually, Marco," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and clear in the quiet room, "before we proceed with selling my house, I believe we need to discuss these debts first, specifically how they came to be." All three of them looked at me, Mom with a flicker of annoyance, Carson with a raised eyebrow of feigned curiosity, Dad with a sort of dazed incomprehension. Marco paused, his hand hovering over the papers. I opened my folder. "These loans," I continued, pulling out the first forged loan application from Friendly Finance and placing it in the center of the table. "This one, for instance, taken out 4 months ago, in your names, Mom, Dad." Mom frowned. "Well, yes, dear, we had to cover some things." "Things like a brand new Mercedes C-Class, perhaps?" I asked, my gaze flicking to Carson. His confident smirk faltered just a little. I then laid down one of the glossy photos of him beaming beside the silver car. A small gasp escaped Mom. Dad's head jerked up. Carson's face went rigid. "Esme, what is the meaning of this?" Mom demanded, her voice rising. "The meaning, Mom," I said, my voice hardening, "is that this signature here, George's signature? It's a forgery." I placed an old signed birthday card from Dad next to the loan document. "Compare them. They're close, but not close enough." The color drained from Dad's face. He stared at the two signatures, then at Carson, his mouth falling slightly open. "And this loan," I continued, laying down another application, this one from Secure Lend, also taken out in your names, also with a forged signature, and another one after that. I spread the documents out, totaling over $70,000. Funny how that's roughly the price of a new Mercedes, isn't it, Carson? Carson's face was now a mask of dawning horror. He looked like a cornered animal. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting between me, the papers, and our parents. "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice like ice. I added the printouts of the bank statements, showing the large deposits from these loan companies, followed by equally large withdrawals. The money came into their account, and then, poof, it was gone. Around the same time, you started sporting new designer clothes, a fancy smartwatch, and, of course, this rather expensive car that required prestige auto detailing. I tossed the email confirmation onto the growing pile of evidence. Marco Powell was watching this unfold with wide, shocked eyes, but he remained silent, a stunned observer to our family's implosion. Mom was staring at Carson, her face a mixture of disbelief and dawning, terrible understanding. "Carson," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is she saying?" "She's lying," Carson finally blurted out, his voice cracking. "She's making it all up. She doesn't want to sell her precious house, so she's trying to blame me. Am I, Carson?" I met his panicked gaze. "Then explain the car. Explain these signatures. Explain where $70,000 went, because Mom and Dad certainly don't seem to know." Dad finally spoke, his voice raspy, broken. "Carson, son, did you do this?" He looked utterly devastated, like his world had just crumbled around him. Carson stared at him, his bravado completely gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to form a coherent denial. The evidence was too damning, too complete. I looked from Carson's terrified face to my mother's aghast expression, to my father's broken one. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Then I turned to my parents. "The question isn't about my house anymore," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "It's about what you're going to do about your son. It's about the fact that he defrauded you, and that you were so quick to believe his lies, so quick to blame my struggling shop, so willing to ruin me to protect him, even from yourselves." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and shattered illusions. Carson looked like he was about to throw up. Mom just stared, tears welling in her eyes. Dad looked like he'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. The smugness, the entitlement, the carefully constructed family narrative, it had all come crashing down in a sterile bank office. The dam finally broke. Carson crumpled, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. I didn't mean for it to get so out of control," he wailed, the words muffled. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed a little boost." Mom let out a strangled cry, a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Carson, how could you, after everything we've done for you?" She rounded on him, her earlier shock morphing into a raw, hysterical fury. "Your own parents, and you let us blame Esme? You stood there and let us demand she sell her home?" Dad just sat there, utterly silent, his face gray. He looked like a statue, frozen in a moment of unbearable pain. The fight seemed to have drained out of him completely, leaving behind a hollow shell. Marco Powell cleared his throat, his professional composure strained. "Perhaps," he suggested delicately, his eyes avoiding direct contact with any of us, "this is a family matter that needs to be resolved privately. We can reschedule any legitimate financial discussions for a later date, once things are clearer." He gathered the untouched bank paperwork with a quiet efficiency. I stood up, collecting my folder. My job here was done. "I think that's a good idea, Marco. Thank you for your time." I didn't look at my family. I couldn't. I just turned and walked out of the conference room, out of the bank, and into the cool, indifferent air outside. The sounds of Mom's escalating tirade and Carson's pathetic whimpers faded behind me. I drove home, the silence in my car a stark contrast to the storm I'd just unleashed. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. There was a grim satisfaction, yes, but also a profound sadness. The family I'd known, flawed as it was, had been irrevocably shattered. The fallout was swift, though I only heard about it in piecemeal snippets. Sarah called later that day, having received a frantic, tearful call from my mother. Apparently, one of the loan companies, alerted by Marco Powell about potential fraud after our dramatic exit, had already initiated an investigation. Carson, faced with actual legal repercussions, had confessed to everything, not just to our parents, but to the authorities. He had to sell the Mercedes, of course. It barely covered a fraction of the debt he'd racked up. I heard he was facing charges, though I made it clear I wouldn't be pressing any myself. The loan companies were more than capable of handling that. My parents, forced to confront the full extent of their son's betrayal and their own monumental denial, were devastated. They had to sell their own house, the one filled with a lifetime of memories, to cover the remaining debts. They moved into a small rented apartment, ironically, one very similar to the depressing brochures Mom had so eagerly pressed on me. They tried to reach out. Mom called, her voice thick with tears and guilt-ridden apologies. "Esme, I am so sorry. We were blind. We were fools. Can you ever forgive us?" Dad sent a short, stilted email, full of remorse and shame. Even Carson, through a mutual acquaintance, tried to send a message, something about being young and stupid and hoping I could understand. I didn't respond directly to any of them. Not yet. The wounds were too raw, the betrayal too deep. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I kept my house, my sanctuary. My online shop, ironically, started to do even better. Orders poured in, as if the universe itself was rewarding my stand. It became a symbol of my independence, my resilience. A few weeks after the bank meeting, I was sitting on my small porch, sipping tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Just checking in," she said. "How are you, really?" I took a deep breath. "I'm okay," I said, and for the first time, it felt true. It's quiet, too quiet sometimes, but it's a good quiet. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine was served in a sterile bank office, and yes, there was a certain satisfaction in watching the truth unravel. But the silence in my family albums speaks volumes now. The empty chairs at future holidays, the unspoken words hanging in the air. I chose truth, and in doing so, I chose myself. Some debts, I realized, can never truly be repaid, not in money anyway. But some chains, the ones that bind you to toxic patterns and unearned guilt, can, and absolutely must, be broken. I looked out at the fading light, a sense of hard-won peace settling over me. My future was my own, finally, and that was a victory worth more than any house,